Burning Man doesn't really afford much opportunity for wasted time, and the fact that you're coming to this means you don't consider this a waste of time, and I hope we don't disappoint you. My name is Kent Northcote, and I'm giving a talk today with my compatriots, Arthur and Hunter. And the topic...
Hi. Why, thank you.
Our topic today is going to be on critical thinking. Usually when I come to the Burn, I give a talk on things like mental phenomena, consciousness, attention, that sort of stuff. And this being 2012, we thought, let's change things up a little bit. So, I'm a doctor. I practice emergency medicine in Colorado. And a couple years ago, I had sort of a rebirth. And it was a disappointing rebirth because I realized that to a very large extent, my education had failed me, right? I got a lot of education, right? I don't just got college. I got medical school plus 4 years of residency. Now, one would think after that much fucking time in a classroom, right, I would be taught how to think. But does anybody here feel that they were really never taught how to think? Rather, they were taught what to think. This seems to be a general case. Let's drive this home as an example of how we don't think properly. We got about, let's just say 40 people in this room. It's probably less. Let's postulate 40. And I'll take 3 answers to this question. What are the chances that any 2 people here have the same birthday? If you know this one, please hold your tongue. Anybody want to guess? Oh, come on. 5%.
And I heard 2 people. We have a bid from the back. 2 people. Do I hear 3? Do I have 3 people? Twin brother. Oh, wait.
2 people is not a percentage, sir. Listen to the question. So we got 5%. Anybody else? 40%-ish. 40%. One more. We'll take one more from the crowd. Going once. Going twice. Come on, you pussies. What is it?
Wait. I heard something from the back.
Above 90%. Okay.
Calculator, I can actually tell you.
So he actually has the right answer. It's about 95%. Does that ring true with anybody here? It doesn't ring true with me. To me, that's exceedingly counterintuitive. And yet that appears to be the case. In fact, it doesn't just appear to be the case. It is the case. This is a provable thing. And I can prove it to you later if we want. We can do this afterwards. We have a large question-answer period afterwards. So the point of this is that on some things, our intuition doesn't necessarily answer us in the right way all the time. Some things it does. If I wake up in the morning and I say, you know what? I feel like waffles this morning. Or I feel like I'm in pain. No one's going to go, oh man, you're not in pain. No. Bullshit, fuck you. My intuition is on, right? There are some things where it's spot on. But there are some things when it's not. And this is not a new concept. Here's a quote from H.G. Wells. Quote, "Statistical thinking will one day be as necessary for efficient citizenship as the ability to read and write." He's referring to thinking probabilistically, thinking in terms of likelihood, thinking in terms of just not what is possible, but rather in what is plausible. Does anybody here think they're really good at knowing what is plausible in all domains? Anybody?
My mother does.
Your mom does. How about in many domains? Okay, we got one. Let's do a second example. Do you know the Monty Hall problem? Anybody here know the Monty Hall problem? Okay, you guys don't say anything. All right, so we're playing Let's Make a Deal, right? On Monty Hall, we got 3 doors. We got door 1, we got door 2, we got door 3, okay? Behind one of these doors is a new, what sort of car do you like to drive?
I want a big van.
One of these doors has a big van behind it. The other 2 doors have goats, okay? All right. Which door do you want to pick? The one with a van. Yes, good answer.
Hey, diddle, right down the middle.
Okay, which door? Number 2?
Sure.
All right. I'm going to open up door number 1 and show you a goat.
Yay!
You don't want a goat? No. So you got door 2 and 3 are still open, right? Do you want to keep your same choice, or do you want to change?
I forget, because I know you're supposed to follow your gut, but I feel like if you change, let's go with door number 2. Hey, the diddle, right down the middle.
So we're sticking with door 2. This is door 2. Is this a wise decision? No! It's wrong. It's categorically wrong. There's no intuition around this which tells you it's right, right? It's wrong. If you switch doors, you increase your chances of winning. Yeah, it's 2/3 chance of being door 3, 1/3 chance of being door 1. Is that intuitive to anybody? It certainly isn't to me, right?
I wasn't very good at math.
You don't need to be good at math. Even mathematicians don't get this. So just to drive the point home once again, our intuitive thinking is not always great at telling us when something is bullshit or not. So that's the point of this talk. We're going to explore how to determine if a proposition is plausible. We'll look at the case, perhaps, for stars hundreds of thousands of light years away, and possibly now non-existent, that they can inform you on, perhaps what stocks to invest in, or perhaps who we should invade. We'll consider maybe that the Earth is 6,000 years old and was created in 6 days. All the geology and everything that we see, 6,000 years. That's a claim out there. We'll talk about evolution being a lie, probably promulgated by those that want to take away our Second Amendment rights. So we need an approach to think about claims. And we already determined that, if I want waffles in the morning, that's a believable claim. No one has a problem accepting that. But if I choose door number 1, that's not a very good claim, not a very good proposition. So how do we go about determining if something is bullshit or not? Well, we see we can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. We can't say if my intuition says X, therefore X must be right. And we've also seen that sometimes intuition is right. So how do we approach this? Is there a fair and balanced approach? Sorry, I had to use that. So we do need a fair approach. And it's not unlikely that some of you came here today, expecting a harangue against New Age phenomena. You'll get it. But just because something is new or traditional or based upon, scare quotes, Western methods, doesn't mean it doesn't deserve a fair assessment. Okay? The thing we like about science, one of the things, is that everyone gets a say. There's no revelation, right? Everyone gets a fucking vote. What did Einstein say when the Nazi doctor said, it's a bunch of fucking Jewish science? He said, well, it just takes one to prove me wrong. Fuck you.
Hitler's book was 100 scientists against Einstein. And he said, if I'm wrong, it only take one to point that out.
So we're going to overgo a process today taken from a book called How to Think About Weird Things. This is a formulaic way of approaching things. Okay? Sort of a one-size-fits-all, sort of not. Before we actually go over the algorithm, and I'll be brief about it, we're going to lay out some ground rules. So first of all, this talk, the assumptions in this talk is that it is based upon the philosophical position of naturalism. That everything that is real is also natural. This is an assumption that we're assuming. That was clever. In other words, supernatural explanations are a priori ruled out. Okay? Also, objections based upon the idea that there can't be objections. Did you guys catch that? Objections based upon the idea that there can't be objections is also ruled out. What's that from? Anybody know? There's a term for that. Anybody? Post? Voodoo economics? That's postmodernism. That's a postmodernist claim that everything is subjective. You can have no objective knowledge. That's our first ground rule.
So you're rejecting that?
I'm rejecting that.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm saying there are objective claims about the Earth. Yeah. If you say there's no objective claims, that's an objective claim. It argues itself out of existence. The second ground rule is that we are not here to bash people. Okay? This is not about me being right, or Hunter being right, or Arthur being right. Maybe it's about Hunter being right.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm just left.
But this is about bashing ideas. And so if you find yourself becoming offended and wanting to interrupt or get up and leave, before you do so, ask yourself if what's offending you are the ideas we're attacking, or is that we're attacking you? Because our last ground rule is we're going to have a long Q&A period afterwards. In fact, we have time at our other camp as well, which we can retreat to. So there'll be plenty of time for questions. So briefly, here's a formula we're going to use. We're going to look at different claims. We're going to apply the formula to them. This is the search formula, S-E-A-R-H, search. The first is S. This is state the claim. What the fuck are you saying, right? If you're saying ghosts are real, what do you mean by ghosts? What do you mean by real? Here's a quote from Jefferson, which puts this home. Quote, ideas must be distinct before reason can act upon them. Does anybody know the preceding phrase? Anybody? No? Okay. The preceding phrase is this. I love Jefferson. Ridicule is the only weapon which can be used against unintelligible propositions. Does anybody know the following phrase? No? No? He was ripping on the church. So that's S, state your claim. E, examine the evidence. What are the reasons for accepting or rejecting the claim? Okay? How good is the evidence? E is a deep topic, right? To really flush out E, you have to know statistical thinking. You have to know plausibility and likelihood. Okay? This is why statistical thinking is important. A is alternative hypotheses. Okay? What are the other hypotheses that can explain your claim? Okay? You can't just consider one. That's fucking impoverished, right? You're going to have one explanation, you're going to settle on that. Well, we do that, right? That's a default capacity of human psychology. In fact, animal psychology. Anybody know why? Like, why would organisms just go, oh, first solution, boom, I'm there? Anybody?
Lazy.
Lazy, that kind of gets to it. What else? Efficiency, boom, it's efficient, right? Same thing with binary thinking. This person's either good or they're evil, right? So alternative hypotheses allow nuance to blend into our analysis. That's the A, alternative hypotheses, SEA. The R, C, and H are a bit of a mouthful, okay? All right, so bear with me. R is rate according to the criteria is the C, each hypothesis. The criteria are the criteria of adequacy. We'll go over a few of them. R, C, and H. So we look at the evidence, okay, for each claim, and then we map each claim to itself. We compare them on a normalized scale, essentially. We compare them to each other, okay? All right. So search criteria. I'm going to give you just a couple. There are several. I'd bore the fuck out of you if I went over all of them, all right? Let's just do a couple. The first one I want to pause on is testability. Okay? Is this claim testable? Can we ask questions about this claim? Why should that matter? Why should it matter? Why is a hypothesis you can't test? Why does that matter? Why does it matter if you can test it?
It means there's no effect.
You can't distinguish
Maybe.
from some contradictory claim that is equally untestable?
Okay. Didn't think about that one, maybe. Anybody else? So you can prove it? Okay, maybe. The problem with lack of testability is that claims that you can't test don't carry any weight. You don't know if they're correct or not, right? You can't go out and ask nature. They don't subject themselves to the scientific process. So in this system that we're talking about, a non-testable claim is a weightless claim, is a worthless claim. If you can't test it, what's the fucking point? That's one of the criteria. We'll do two more. The second one is scope. And scope is how many different phenomena can the claim explain? Okay? So for instance, if we take a hypothesis like the second law of thermodynamics, remember it wasn't always a law, right? At some point someone said, oh, the universe seems to work this way. I'm going to go out and test it, right? And eventually became the second law. The second law explains so much so that here's a quote from Arthur Eddington, the guy that confirmed Einstein, right? Arthur Eddington, quote, If someone points out to you that your pet theory of the universe is in disagreement with Maxwell's equations, then so much worse for Maxwell's equations. If it is found to be contradicted by observation, well, these experimentalists do bungle things sometimes. But if your theory is found to be against the second law, I can give you no hope. There is nothing for it but to collapse in deepest humiliation. That's scope. And turns out Eddington was actually understating his case. For we nowadays have thermodynamics addressing not just physics and chemistry, but addressing biology. And not just biology, but thoughts and intentions and values. That's fucking scope. The last criteria that I'll mention is simplicity. According to 14th century friar William of Ockham, we should tend to favor the simplest explanation. Why? Why should we favor the simplest explanation?
More likely.
Why is it more likely? You can't prove it wrong? Well, maybe. That sort of gets at it. Okay. Anybody else?
There's less to go wrong.
That's even better. One more.
Because if you don't have any evidence to support the more complicated explanation, the more complicated parts of it, then why would it be that more complicated thing unless you have evidence to support that?
Okay. That sort of gets it as well. In a nutshell, the least number of assumptions that you encumber your hypothesis with just probabilistically makes it more likely. Doesn't mean it's written in stone. There are complex things out there, right? But simple things tend to come first in our universe. We need less baggage with simpler claims, right? We want to be lean. We want to be svelte with our claims, right? So, just a moment. So I want to hand the mic over to one of my compatriots. What we've covered are reasons to think about reasons, essentially. And Hunter's going to cover some specific topics. And while we go through this, I want you to think about the criteria we talked about, okay? And I want you to think about the evidence for these things. And we're going to go over them at the end and see if we can get a consensus view on them.
My name is Hunter Ackerman. I am a musician, actor, armchair philosopher. But the cool thing is I just broke 175,000 hits on YouTube doing science music. Thank you. Under the brand that I carry of the genre humanist rock. And the really fucking cool thing is, how many of you know who Richard Dawkins is? Yeah? Yeah? Most everybody in the house? I'm going to be fucking opening for him this spring. Gonna go out. Don't know if it's gonna be just me and a guitar or me and a whole band yet, but we're gonna try this out in Miami at the very end of February and see how it goes. So that's where we're going. All right, so my area of this talk is going to be over intelligent design. We've got some great bullet points as to what constitutes a good explanation of things versus what makes a less good explanation of things. So we're going to see how intelligent design stacks up to this. So our first bullet point is state the claim, S. Intelligent design is promulgated by something called the Discovery Institute, which is a Christian public policy think tank based out of Seattle, Washington. It was founded in 1990. The institution defines it as the proposition that, quote, certain features of the universe and of living things are best explained by an intelligent cause and not an undirected process such as natural selection. All right, so what are the points of evidence that they claim for this? Number one, that we cannot observe evolution, that evolution is a historical science, much like geology. Number 2, something called irreducible complexity. This is the notion that if you build an arch out of blocks, there is a keystone in the very middle. And irreducible complexity basically hinges as an argument around that there are structures in biology that represent an arch that if you remove the keystone, the rest of the thing falls down and doesn't work without any individual part of it. All right? Number 3, and this is my favorite one, perfection. Perfection not only of the human form, but perfection as far as the Earth in its placement in the solar system, the Earth, its properties, as far as distance from the sun, as far as water, as far as a magnetic field around it that blocks us from the sun's ionizing radiation, and the fine-tuning of the universe, the fine-tuning of the forces in the universe to support life. All right, so what could our alternative hypothesis be for any of these things? We'll start with that we cannot observe evolution. Well, we have a genus of butterfly in Hawaii called Hedylipta. Has anybody heard of this thing? There are 2 species of Hedylipta in Hawaii. Now, it's important because Hedylipta is endemic to Hawaii, which means it doesn't grow anywhere else. This butterfly only exists on the Hawaiian Islands. Now, the cool thing about Hedylipta is that their pupa, the caterpillars, have specialized jaws that can only eat bananas. No shit. They cannot absorb any other food source. This is extraordinarily important because these are not the native bananas found in Polynesia, and we have it very well documented that Polynesians brought over the bananas that we find in grocery stores today from Polynesia. We have a nod of recognition back here, and any nutritionists in the crowd should be very familiar with this. So this is important. Bananas have only existed for 1,000 years in Hawaii in their current form, which means that Hedylipta has come about, has evolved from another form in the last 1,000 years in Hawaii and in Hawaii alone. And again, we have 2 different species of this. So we can observe evolution in its progress. Number 2, irreducible complexity. Irreducible complexity usually hinges around asking the wrong question, asking a nonsensical question. Proponents of intelligent design look at irreducible complexity and they ask this nonsensical question like, what use is half an eye? What use is half a wing? It almost sounds sensible until you realize that the only real question here is not what good is half of an eye, but what good is an eye that is half as good. Does it make sense, right? An eye that is half as good is better than an eye that is no good. What good is half a wing? Well, a half a wing can still be used for other things. A half a wing might be used for, a wing that's half as good could possibly be used to aid in gliding, to aid in running faster, to jump out of a tree and away from a predator and actually survive when you crash to the ground. But here's the good one. Perfection. Perfection of the human form. So, when looking at perfection of the human form, our alternative hypothesis to intelligent design is what Neil deGrasse Tyson so eloquently calls stupid design. Let's consider stupid design of the human body just for a moment. All right? This is Tyson's list. We have things like aggressive childhood leukemia, hemophilia, sickle cell anemia. We've got a narrow view of the entire electromagnetic spectrum, right? So people that know that this is basically what we can see, red to blue. Now, insects such as bees and flies see way the hell up here. Crocodiles see redder than what we can process as red. There are more flaws with the way that the human eye is built than I could possibly enumerate in this short span. Everything we see is upside down and backwards. It goes through a hole in the retina that would be if you were looking at a movie screen, right? This is the prime part of the movie screen. The very center of it has a huge hole through which the retina must pass. The photoreceptors are all facing backwards. So light has to pass through the lens, bounce off the fucking back of it, then get absorbed backwards, pass through tubes, pass through little neurons, right? Collecting in one big cord that goes through the center and back out, and all this is upside down and backwards. Now, we exhale most of the oxygen we inhale. We've got prostate cancer. We eat, this is my favorite one, we eat, drink, and breathe through the same fucking hole. This guarantees that some percentage of us will choke for no fucking reason except a quirk of statistics. You know the quote, "There, but for the grace of God go I"? That means, wow, if it weren't for some random quirk, it would be me choking for no fucking reason and dying, right? So, now this, by the way, this eating, drinking, breathing through a different hole is not such a big request. Dolphins do this, and they're mammals. Right? Dolphins breathe through the back of their fucking head. Dolphins will never choke. Dolphins will, however, drown. So even they have some huge flaw if you're looking at it in terms of intelligence. But that's kind of the crux of this thing, is that intelligent design starts with the premise that there is some guiding intelligent force. But when we really look at nature, it seems vastly more likely that evolution only works in hindsight. See, that's the misnomer about this thing, is that evolution does not result in perfection. Evolution results in good enough. Now, how can we take that good enough and improve upon it? And that's exactly what the human brain does with things like the eye. It takes the shitty design of the human eye, and the brain turns that into, we're primarily visual creatures as far as our five senses are concerned. I mean, that's a hell of an adaptation. So much for perfection of the human body. Perfection of the earth. I've got this wonderful, what are the people, Jehovah's Witness books, right? They get this wonderfully written Jehovah's Witness book about the Goldilocks radius of the earth from the sun. So we're about 90 million miles from the sun. If we were any closer, then water would most likely vaporize instantly. It would be too hot to exist in a liquid form on the surface of the earth. If it were any further back, it would freeze instantly, both of which would make life seemingly impossible as we currently understand it to have evolved. We've got this wonderful magnetic thing going on that protects us from ionizing radiation from the sun. There's lots and lots and lots of details about the earth that seem to support the notion that it is here for life. But look at this. We've got volcanoes that just level fucking cities and villages. We've got the Indonesian tsunami in 2004 killed 200,000 people. And by the way, most of these are Muslims, so if you're picking sides as far as a religion goes, there's not a lot of hope for you, because then there's the Lisbon earthquake in 1755, killed 70,000 mostly Christians. We got floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, lightning strikes. We can't live on 2/3 of the Earth's surface because it's covered in water, right? So, and the 1/3 that's left that we can live on, the 1/3 that is solid ground, half of that third will either freeze, or it's more like out here in Burning Man, will freeze or will fucking starve on the half of the third that remains. 99% of all life, of all species that have ever existed in the history of the Earth are now extinct. And it took 3.5 billion years to make multicellular life. None of this suggests to me objectively that we are the end result of any one benevolent process that would put us here. As far as the universe is concerned, most planets are completely unstable, and we're on a one-way course that will wind down to the eventual heat death. We are on a one-way trip to absolute oblivion. Last point, last one about this, about the perfection of the Earth in particular, right? The perfection of the Earth that is here to support life, supposedly. Now, think about this for a moment. In our galaxy alone, we have something like 10 to 30 billion stars in our galaxy. So imagine how many planets must be necessarily in our galaxy. Now, we look out into, is anybody seen Hubble? The, what is it, the deep field pictures of Hubble, right? So this is where we take the Hubble, we point it to the darkest spot of the sky that we can find. I mean, there's a black spot, there seems to be nothing right there. We're gonna focus it right there for about 10 days and just let it absorb all the light we can. We see tons and tons of little dots when we do that through the Hubble. Each one of those turns out to be a new fucking galaxy. So we've got something like 300 billion galaxies that we are now currently aware of, and I think the number has even gone up since that research comes out of my mouth. So point being here, if the chances for life to form on a planet are something extraordinarily remote, like say 1 in 200 billion, that's pretty remote, right? We have enough fucking lottery tickets in the existing universe that one of those will hit a pretty sweet spot in which life is not only possible, but probably actually likely. And we, in order to even have this conversation, must necessarily be standing on top of that very extraordinarily unlikely needle in this haystack of possible planets. And this is what we call the planetary anthropic principle. So, let's go back to our bullet points now that we have examined the evidence. So we will now rate according to the criteria of adequacy each hypothesis. Now, testability is our first criteria. Problem here with intelligent design is that intelligent design is not testable. The problem with faith-based claims in general. See, now a faith-based claim, let's look at this very carefully. A faith-based claim really amounts to I believe because I believe. Now, the problem with this approach means that if you assert something, I believe it because I believe it, you're not necessarily wrong. But if you are wrong, you will never fucking know it. Right? That's how it hinges on. Evolution is tested constantly. For example, in Darwin's time, he predicted super long moth proboscis. Right? There must be a moth out there with a proboscis that's something like 12 to 14 inches long. He predicted this by looking at an orchid. This particular orchid had an extraordinarily deep part that it could only be pollinated by something that could take... You get the idea. This orchid can only be pollinated by something with an intimidatingly long 14-inch probe. And sure enough, after Darwin died, we found not only one moth, but two of similar proboscis size. So evolution's constantly tested. Every time we dig up another fossil of a trilobite, it's never accompanied by a fossil of, say, a rabbit. Because fossilized rabbits in the Precambrian, that would give evolution some real problems. But we don't see that. So, fruitfulness. Does the claim yield predictions that explain new phenomena? Well, ID doesn't. ID, intelligent design. ID doesn't, which is why, specifically, it's not testable. Evolution does constantly. We understand that antibiotic-resistant strains will come about constantly. We understand this very, very well because the criteria for selecting naturally antibiotic-resistant bacteria will absolutely come about if only, say, 80% of the course of antibiotics are used. The 20% that survive, those are going to be the bad motherfuckers that survived. Those are the ones that come to the fore now because we've wiped out the slow-moving, the slow sicker of the herd of bacteria, right? So, scope. How many different phenomena can the hypothesis explain? So here's the thing. Creationists willingly admit to microevolution all the time. You're not going to find any proponents in any religious university that suggests that microevolution does not happen. However, conversely, so their point is that microevolution. I've got to stop saying microcreation. That doesn't make sense. So microevolution, what is this? Microevolution is small adaptations. If we see spots on guppies that live in a particular pond, these spots will grow larger if the pond rocks will be replaced with slightly larger rocks. We will see mice turn slightly browner if they can camouflage a little bit. You know, these little adjustments are observable microevolution, and they absolutely push no one's tolerability. So we see microevolution all the damn time, but you got to ask yourself, conversely, how many times do we see micro-creationism? How often does life just sort of spontaneously happen in front of us, right? It's just a nonsensical proposition. We've never seen this. We never observe it. So, conservatism. So conservatism is our last bullet point on this. Conservatism basically addresses what are the other hypotheses, what are the other approaches that may support what we're talking about. Evolution is supported by geographic distribution of species, it's supported by DNA evidence, embryology, geology, which are the dirt people, for those of you who are Big Bang Theory fans. My dad's a geologist. He laughs his ass off every time they call geologists the dirt people. Paleontology, botany, zoology, herpetology. I won't even go through the list of all the things that support evolution. Dostoevsky, I can never say this fucking guy's name right. He suggested that nothing in biology makes sense except through the lens of evolution. But most importantly, evolution is derived in all of the cases of all the fields that support it by starting with the facts and then seeing what conclusions we can draw from them. Intelligent design, conversely, starts with a conclusion and says, now what are the facts that we can find to support this? This is an extraordinarily important thing. This is a very, very important pattern that we should notice as far as how our species thinks, as far as what we do. Because we've got something that's very observable. When we come up with a way that the universe can actually be said to work, and that there is evidence to support it, we call that a science. On the other hand, when human beings come up with a way that we think the universe works, and the evidence to support it is simply that people believe it, we call that a religion. Notice this. It follows very, very, very distinctly into these two different categories. All right. So, ultimately, I'm going to wrap this up with why is this important, with a quote from John Wynne Tyson. Until we establish a felt sense of kinship between ourselves and sailing art cars with awesome sound systems, evolution shows that we are absolutely inextricably connected to all other life on the planet, and thus to the rest of the solar system, thus to the rest of the galaxy, thus to the rest of the universe. We are literally, as living things, a small corner of the universe that is aware of itself. This has some extraordinarily profound implications. And John Wynne Tyson said, until we establish a felt sense of kinship between our own species and those fellow mortals who share with us the sun and the shadow of life on this agonized planet, there is no hope for other species, there's no hope for the environment, and there's no hope for ourselves. So with that, I give you Mr. Arthur, sir.
No,
Hold it closer.
Just closer.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, there we go. Question for you guys. How many of you guys have ever had an idea, a belief, even a religion, and then ended up changing it 180 degrees?
Me.
Cool. More than I thought. Yeah. And so it can be really, really hard. It can be really humbling, right? So I'm a priori, or Arthur, a heebie-jeebie and a web developer from Brooklyn, New York, and an armchair philosopher.
Yeah.
And I have a really damn interesting story that happened in Russia. When I was 22, I did something edgy and brave. I went to Russia as a Christian student missionary. It was a really fun year. I was teaching English. I was teaching the Bible, a lot of Bible studies, things like that. We would use the English school to get people interested and invite them to extra English practice, where we talk about religion, read the Bible, sing songs, that sort of good stuff. I was really devout. I really wanted to bring my church to Russia, and I wanted to save souls. I was in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which talks about a 6,000-year-old earth. They're very staunch creationists, and they're very serious about it. But they also really try to be academic and scientific about coming up with all these complicated ways of proving it and giving evidence for intelligent design. They're very, very big proponents of intelligent design. And so when I was in Russia, this guy, a guy named Sergey, would come to our study groups, and he would ask lots of questions. It became clear pretty quickly that he was really skeptical, and he was fucking sharp. He would ask a lot of questions. People would avoid interacting with him, avoid talking to him, but not me. I enjoyed the challenge. I loved answering his questions. He was really fun to talk to, and we spent quite a bit of time talking and debating, working each other into circles. And so one day he asked me a really damn challenging question. We had been talking about evolution and creation, and he asked me, do I really believe this? And I had to pause. The way he asked it made me really, really think and dig deep. Do I really believe it? I paused, but then I mustered my courage and confidence and defended my position. We went on, but then the seeds were sown. So I began to study a whole lot about evolution, study the other side really hard, so I could debunk that shit. So I could argue why my point of view was right, why they were wrong, because I really, really believed mine was right, but I knew that I needed to know more. I knew that there were a lot of questions, there were a lot of things that seemed kind of unknowable. Like, you could read either side and come to this conclusion, then you could read this side and come to this conclusion, but it was something really, really hard to know for sure. And so I thought that's how it was and kind of felt that way. But then as I studied and read The Blind Watchmaker by Richard Dawkins, really great book. I love him, and I hope I can be there in Miami. I really, really want to be. That would be awesome. Brother. Yeah. And so when I did that, the damnedest thing happened. I converted 180 degrees. It was slow, to be sure. It took a while. And it was hard. It was really challenging. In a way, I did feel like the world was kind of falling out from under me. And I really thought hard about the deep, difficult questions. And as I looked at various points of evidence for both sides, I found some compelling and fascinating and interesting. The intelligent design arguments are really well thought out. These people aren't stupid. You can be a really brilliant, intelligent person and believe something that just isn't the case. But when I learned about science, evolution, biology, that shit is fucking awesome. It's really, really cool. And so here's a really cool example. How many of you guys know about retroviruses? After Burning Man, you will. So retroviruses like herpes, AIDS, a whole bunch of them. There are actually a whole shitload of them that really do nothing interesting. They don't make you sick. And they're in frickin' everything. Just about every living thing gets inhabited by these retroviruses. And retroviruses do something really cool and unique. They have this niche of injecting stuff into your DNA. They put their own DNA or DNA from someone else into you. And it used to be thought that this DNA was junk DNA. It's actually a whole lot more complex than that. That's actually a really important driver of evolution and really cool to study and read about. But anyway, we can look up this family tree of what's related, like how we're 98 point something related to chimps and bonobos. Almost exactly the same DNA, software within every cell of our body. It's really, really similar to theirs. We look at things like dogs, monkeys, meerkats, things like that. Also fairly similar, but less similar. Turns out that what we thought was junk DNA, the retroviral DNA, is also really similar, but it gets less and less similar the farther we go back in time. We look at lizards and we still see some, but it's different. It begins to change the farther apart we go. And mathematically, you can really model this tree that really, really corresponds perfectly to what we see in the real world, in nature. And so that kind of coherence really, really paints a picture so consistent with what we see from a theory like evolution. It's really, really compelling. And so thinking about evolution and thinking about the arguments from the other side, the creationist arguments, they're kind of in three main categories that I can identify. One is what I call God of the gaps. I think Hunter mentioned it as argument from ignorance, where if you don't know something, if something's mysterious, therefore a wizard did it, right? Sounds good? Well, I think that's pretty easy to see through. It's a hypothesis, but I think you could do a lot better. The second one is the idea of this big global conspiracy over the last 150 years of millions of scientists. They all collude together to keep something like creationism and intelligent design under wraps and quiet, and they collude together, and it's all done in perfect secrecy. That sounds really, really implausible, difficult. I don't know, that just doesn't really add up to me. Yeah, and then there's the idea of social Darwinism. Evolution will lead to atheism, immorality, the society going to hell, degeneration. Yeah, horrible stuff. What you see around you, right? All these evolutionists. And so that doesn't even add up when you look at countries like Norway and places with a whole lot of atheists. They're actually pretty functional, pretty good societies. You look at prisons and you see things like that. But that doesn't matter, because that argument isn't even wrong. It doesn't even make sense. It's about something completely different than biological evolution.
Also, just to touch on that, contrast the least religious areas of the world, like in Scandinavia, to some of the most religious areas of the world, like the Middle
and
East.
States.
And gun violence in the United States, right? Who's killing each other, right? Is it the atheists that are going about with chaos? No, it's right.
Yeah, really fair point. And so you have these criticisms that really kind of suck at being good criticisms of the other side of evolution, and they don't advocate anything for intelligent design. In fact, I see that creationists really ultimately fail to promote their own side. They don't give you one shred of evidence other than it being written in a book from the Bronze Age, or them feeling or believing that, and that's not really a good way to build a scientific case. And so it really fails as a hypothesis for something that you can take seriously, and that's what I found. And so in this process, by being a skeptically minded, critically thinking person, what anything in that mindset of what any critically thinking, skeptically minded person should do in this case is really evaluate what they believe, what the evidence says, and if the evidence contradicts your pre-held beliefs, It's okay to change your mind, to pivot 180 degrees. It's the responsible thing to do. And I did it. It wasn't easy. It was a slow process. But I'm really, really thankful. I fucking love science. I love the reality of the universe we live in with its 4 billion years of glory. And I love what we have all around us. I learn something new every day, and I love it. Thank you.
So we're getting there. Thanks for your patience. Good job.
Yeah.
Who here has heard of homeopathy? Oh, good. Who here has used homeopathy? Who here thought it worked for them? Uh-huh.
Just don't fucking know, really.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like it works, right? My intuition tells me it works. My experience says it works. Does it really work? We're going to look at that. Let's state the claim. What is the claim of homeopathy?
Claim of homeopathy is that some small bit, some dilution. You know what? I'm going to give you a little example. You all know XKCD? This is yeah. This is a web comic. It's a bunch of stick figures.
Oh, yeah.
Right? This is math, science, and romance all done up in once. Woo! Now, there's one panel. Yeah, isn't it a wonderful combination? There's an XKCD single panel cartoon of the female of the couple kind of lying with her knees open, and the guy is coming toward her with a dropper, and he says, "Honey, I've now diluted my semen to 1/300th of its original concentration. We're bound to get pregnant for sure." And underneath the caption says, "Natural selection does not select for homeopathy." Definition, sir.
Thank you, sir. Now,
Beautiful example.
Thank you.
you remember that, won't you? You probably forget this one. This is the formal definition. The core premise is that dilute doses of what causes disease in healthy persons is curative. Dilute doses of what causes disease in healthy persons is curative. Like cures like. Well, how's this supposed to work? How is this supposed to work? Well, the way we're told it works, the way the practitioners tell us it works, is that there is an imperceptible spirit-like essence left behind when it's diluted down. This is what revitalizes the body. This is what supports the élan vital. That's the mechanism. An imperceptible spirit-like essence. Okay, you know what? I got an open mind. My mind is open to accepting or rejecting. Lay it on me. What's the evidence? We got a claim. What's the evidence? So, I could do something really horrible right now and read you all the abstracts I brought. I'll share one with you. There was a study done testing the efficacy of homeopathy on the pain of tooth extraction versus placebo.
Go root canal.
Go root canal, right? Here you go. We're taking 16 of your teeth out. Here's your water. Here's your homeopathy. All right? Okay. Did it work? Right? Before I tell you the answer, I'll tell you that 2 of the authors are homeopaths. And many of the subjects were in homeopathy school. If there's a bias to find efficacy, it's in one direction, isn't it? No effect over placebo. None. That's what most studies show. And in fact, that's what all, and I'll stand here and say all, without fear of contradiction, all good studies show no efficacy over placebo. And we'll have questions afterwards if you want to go to the mat on this. So that's the evidence. Do we have any alternative hypotheses? Anybody? This is a creative bit. What else could it be? You in the front.
What's the difference in the studies between not just homeopathy versus placebo, but homeopathy versus nothing at all, not giving a placebo?
So that wasn't the question, sir. The question was, what are the alternative hypotheses? We'll have questions later.
The hypothesis is that that's the effect, is that you have something that you believe will help you versus not having something that you will help believe.
Can you tighten that down a bit?
It is a placebo.
Yeah, it is a placebo.
So we got one offering of placebo. Okay. Oh gosh. Do placebos exist? I don't know. I've been practicing emergency medicine for, I think, Abed, when did we graduate medical school? Like 97? 98. I guess that makes almost 15 years, okay? I got a little bit of experience, right? I love placebo. I work with it every goddamn day, right? Because it's effective. We know what happens. It even happens in unconscious people. You can show it in unconscious people, right? Bizarre. You don't need to be awake for placebo to happen. So we know placebo exists, okay? We have strong evidence for placebo, for multiple kinds of placebo, and for placebo in multiple domains.
Supposedly it exists if you know it's placebo.
It exists if you know it's placebo and if you don't know it's placebo. Even if you don't even know, if you're unconscious, placebo works. It's almost, dare I say, magical. Lurking. That's the ghost of the machine. So we've got our two hypotheses, right? We could do more. Let's do these two. Let's compare placebo versus homeopathy, right? We got the evidence for both. How do we rate these things? Okay. How do they map up to each other? What are the criteria of adequacy that they map up to? Let's consider scope. Actually, homeopathy does pretty well, right? Homeopathy is purported to cure everything. Everything, right? Okay, that's a pretty broad scope, right? It's hard to get bigger than everything. Is there an issue with that? Does that sort of rankle? Is that sort of counterintuitive in a way? Does your gut kind of twist and you kind of get a little bit nauseous with that? What's the problem with curing everything? Anybody?
We're still
We'll get bored.
dying.
We'll get bored. Okay.
We're
Yes.
still dying.
We're still dying. Okay. So we're saying it. They're saying it does cure everything. Let's assume it does cure everything. Okay. Why is that implausible? Why is it implausible to cure everything?
The scope's too big.
It's too
There
big.
you go.
Like, are you kidding me? Really, everything? It's like saying I love everything. Really? Do you love herpes? How about polio? Right?
Also, isn't there always some kind of new mutation or creation or something?
Speak up, sir.
Isn't there like always some kind of new mutation or creation, like say of a virus, whenever it's passed from one person to another, it kind of turns into a new virus?
I'm not sure what your question is.
It's not a question, I'm just saying.
It's a statement. Hold your questions to the end. All right? Unless you want a point of clarification, we have a huge Q&A after this. Okay? And we'll totally go through that if you like. But if you need clarification or just answer the questions we're posing, because we got to get through this. People are going to start glazing over, man. It's not pretty when they glaze over. Look at Mo. She's already glazing over.
I'm glazing right now.
All right. So scope. So it kind of falls on scope because there's too much scope, right? How about simplicity? Homeopathy runs against the rocks when you come up to simplicity, right? Placebo doesn't assume much. Placebo assumes human psychology, right? I assume everyone here is willing to grant that we all have minds, right? Not a big hurdle, okay? Not a big hurdle. I think you all accept that. Thank you. What does homeopathy ask us to assume? Again, we have the undetectable essence that mediates its effects through an undetectable force. That's quite encumbered, right? Those are two big fat assumptions. Not just one elephant in the room, but you got a second elephant in the room, right? You got to dress the elephants, man. It's not a simple way to look at things. But we find bodies scattered on the beach and cargo floating ashore when we consider homeopathy against the criteria of conservatism. Not always a bad word, conservatism, right? Let's reflect on what conservatism is. How well does homeopathy match up against our other corpus of knowledge, right? Against our physics, against our chemistry, against our biology, right? All the things that we know to be the case. And if you object that we don't know them to be the case, you're here at Burning Man, living with technology, right? None of that technology exists without engineering. or physics or chemistry, you've at least implicitly assumed these things are the case. Does homeopathy match up against the claims of physics and chemistry? Well, there's no single verified instance of a substance conveying a stronger effect the more dilute it becomes. Not one. Not one. It's tough to say there's zero of anything, right? Who can say zero? Who can say absolutely not one? That's tough to say. We're saying it here. Not one instance. You have a question?
Yeah, I just have a clarification.
Clarification.
You said that the tooth extraction example.
Yep.
What were they giving? What were they claiming? Were they telling the patients what was supposedly diluted and being administered to them?
It was a blinded study, randomized, placebo-controlled, double-blind study. We can go over the details later.
Can you give like any other example of homeopathy?
Of a study? I have a
Of it used in practice.
Yes, I have a number of abstracts in here. There's for cancer therapy. There's for a whole bunch of things, upper respiratory infections, asthma. They've studied it in a broad spectrum. It always fails. Say again?
What substances are they diluting? What are they claiming is stronger in it?
They're saying homeopathic remedy X will work against this disease, and then they're measuring to see if it works. And they're comparing it against placebo.
And do you have any examples of?
I can give you a bunch. I'll give them to you later. Okay. So back to conservatism, right? We have a problem. We have a problem with homeopathy. It doesn't match up to what we know about the world. That's okay, right? We don't know everything, right? We didn't know about electricity at some point. So it's fair to say that we'll never know everything. That's okay. But the problem is you've got to cross some awfully big hurdles, right? If you want to take down the entire edifice of science. It's not impossible. People can do it. But you got your work cut out for you. Homeopathy fails that work. To conclude this bit, we've taken two hypotheses around the concept of homeopathy and placebo. We've compared them against each other. We've given evidence supporting claims for each. We've mapped them to each other as well. And we found homeopathy wanting. Not because we necessarily wanted to find it wanting. I mean, I would love to be able to take water and cure myself of cancer. Who wouldn't, right? There's minimal side effects. Who here has taken chemotherapy? Chemo fucking sucks. All right? But chemo works. Not always, but it often works. But no one wants to take it. So we have a bias towards accepting homeopathy. And we still see it failing. I'm going to hand the mic to Arthur. He has one more section, and then we conclude.
When you guys first heard the theme for Burning Man this year, Burning Man 2012, how many of you were really disappointed, maybe pissed off? Right? What the hell should it have been? Apocalypse, right? Come on, what the hell?
Utility. I thought it was a typo.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of interest in the apocalypse. It's 2012, right? It's a really interesting topic. And so a lot of writing, a lot of discussions, especially on the internet, about apocalypse. In some circles, some fear about it, concern. Some people are kind of freaked out about it. I think by and large it's more funny and interesting and quirky, but there are some legitimate concerns, fears, things like that, or at least interest in what the hell is going on with this whole thing that the Mayans predicted, right? And so with a lot of interest also comes a lot of hype. How many of you remember last year when the Christian radio announcer Harold Camping predicted the end of the world when Jesus was coming back last May?
Go, Rapture, go!
Go Rapture, yeah. Well put, Scott.
Because I've enjoyed all of them so much so far.
And so
I'm looking forward to the
May came and went, and he revised it to October. He was sure, October 22nd, Jesus is coming back. Get ready, repent, sell all your shit, wait up on the rooftops. Incidentally, the church that I grew up in, the Seventh-day Adventists, they are really, really into eschatology as well, the end times, the advent, the soon coming of Christ. It'll happen any fucking day now. That's what they've been saying. They were the 1844 people that did the same thing and had the great disappointment. It was...
They're the ones that climb the trees?
Probably. Well, we all climb trees at some point.
Shakers or Quakers or something.
Yeah. And so, like a lot of Christian fundamentalists interested in end times and eschatology, a lot of Maya 2012 hype actually comes from a precious few number of original sources, a few Bible verses, a stone tablet that says something interesting about a God in 2012. And we'll look at those. It's interesting. And so this is a topic of legitimate interest. It's really relevant right now. But let's look at it in terms of those search criteria we talked about earlier. So stating the claim is a really important thing here. What is the claim? So the claim here is really nebulous. It's really broad. I would say it's completely non-specific too. Is it the end of the world? Is it aliens or gods coming back? Are we going to be elevated to a new form of consciousness? Who knows? It's a whole lot of things going on here. And so here we have a non-specific claim. So that in itself is really hard to figure out, to test. It's really not testable until December 22nd, right? And so we also have the problem that this original source, the stone tablet that I'll talk about in a bit, it's partially untranslatable. It's pretty damaged and worn. And a whole lot of material and books and things like that have been added to it, really expounding upon a couple sentences that sounded interesting. And the whole thing has been blown way out of proportion and really carried away. And all that happened in modern times, the 1960s until the 1990s. The 1990s is when it became really big because this whole thing was coming up soon. And so the 2012 idea was really popularized in 1966 by a guy named Michael D. Coe. And even when he was writing it, he wrote about it in these terms. There is a suggestion that at the end of the Mayan calendar in 2012, apocalyptic things will happen, Armageddon-like wars and calamities will happen. There is a suggestion. People suggest this, say this, talk about it. He wasn't really advocating it at all as some kind of academic research. And so that's what got picked up and people got really, really into. And so that and a lot of the other writings about this whole thing also draw from early 1900s Mayan translations and research and archaeology, especially to references of a cataclysmic flood. Was this a prophecy? Well, modern scholars looking at the Mayan writings about this flood, they really, really come to a very strong conclusion that in these inscriptions they were writing about one or maybe several really, really shitty floods that happened there. And being an agrarian society, that can pose a major problem. It poses a major problem for us today. My cousins had their house completely obliterated by Hurricane Katrina. Just little cinders of roof and woods smattered across this yard. Floods can really, really suck, and there's not much you can do about them. And it's a problem in that area of the world. And Mayans were known to document things really well and keep meticulous records. And so let's discuss the specifics of the Mayan calendar, this thing ending on 2013. And the original writings, like this stone engraving that this comes from. So the Mayans were an agrarian society. They watched the stars a lot. A whole lot. They were phenomenal astronomers. Even before they were Mayans, when they were Olmecs, in the 6th century BC, they started watching the stars and they kept 1,600 years of records. It was really, really cool stuff, and they documented this meticulously. So at night, when you're here on the playa, especially in deep playa, you can see a whole lot of stars. It's incredible, especially if you live in New York like me. When you look up and see all these stars, it's really, really awesome. And so when you're out in deep playa at night, how many of you have looked up and seen the Milky Way, the smattering of white going all the way down to the horizon? It's really, really cool. And the farther you're out in the desert, next Kent, the cooler it looks. It's really awesome. And so, as it happens, the center of the Milky Way, which is this bright bulge in it, is directly behind the constellation Sagittarius. And so, in the middle of winter, in December, Sagittarius is where the sun is at. That's why people talk about people like me being Sagittarii. And so the sun is there, but an interesting phenomenon happens. The sun drifts a little bit year by year. It moves just a little bit in relation to the galaxy. And so when you look up in the sky kind of that way, looking south, you'll see the galaxy go across, and you'll see that kind of bulge in the middle. And the sun will kind of wander through it little by little. And it takes a long time for it to actually do a cycle. It comes back and goes through it again. And the Mayan calendar is based on when the sun crosses that center line, kind of the equator of the galaxy, if you will. And it's really interesting because they spent 1,600 years figuring this out, and they developed a 5,125-year calendar. It's called the Long Count calendar, and it's divided into 13 segments called Baktuns. And the Mayan calendar begins around the year 3100 BC, and in their mythology, that's when the world began. Really important date. And so the sun has moved from there, but it's coming back, and it's crossing over the galaxy. It's crossing that line, and that's when their calendar cycles over, restarts. And interestingly enough, the sun crossing that center line, it's actually not immediate. It's not like that happens on December 21st this year. It happens over 26 years. The sun is kind of big compared to this line. And so it's a 26-year process. Interestingly enough, the center of that was actually in 1998. So it unfortunately already happened. Sorry to spoil the surprise. But the fact that the Mayans were off by 14 years out of 5,000, I think is pretty fucking impressive.
Go Mayans.
They were really, really cool astronomers that did some really cool shit with really ancient technology, like pyramids and swinging little plumb bobs and things like that.
And no glass, right?
And yeah, no glass, no telescopes.
They had fucking rocks.
Yep. They just,
Rocks
yeah,
and
they
chisels
just,
and observation. That's what
yeah,
they
they just wrote shit down and compared it with last year and figured out where this is going, how long it takes. And it had a lot of relevance to when they plant, when they harvested, when they could time floods, eclipses, all kinds of things. They were very ritualistic, very poetic in their descriptions of things like this. Mayan literature is really interesting, and they left a whole lot of inscriptions, carvings, things like that. So what of these carvings talk about the end of the Mayan calendar, 2012, the end of the 13th Baktun? So there are actually two references to the end of this calendar, to 2012. One is really not that interesting. It's just an acknowledgement that it's there, comparing it to the 13th one of the smaller increments, and that's it. No prophecies or anything. But the interesting one is the stone tablet found on the Tortuguera Monument 6, somewhere I'd really, really like to visit someday. It's in Chiapas, Mexico. And so it talks about a god appearing, blessing things, creating a new thing. And it turns out it's in the context of this new monument, this really awesome monument, pyramid type thing, being dedicated in the 7th century. And it uses a really common rhetorical literature device in a lot of Mayan writings where it takes a future date and talks about anniversaries relative to that future date. The Mayan scholars that I read talk about how, as an analogy, we can talk about in 1950, the New York Yankees won the World Series, and that was 50 years before the year 2000, which is a cool number. And they do this a lot. They put a milestone, a marker at some date, the end of a calendar, the end of a cycle, and they work backwards. And they say on this date will be the anniversary of this and this. And so the context of that God blessing this new monument appearing is really clearly within that context and not a prophecy, not a prediction. it's really a lot less interesting than it's been hyped up to be. Still cool, still really interesting poetry, really interesting inscriptions and landmarks from the year 600, a long time ago, back when we were in the Dark Ages. Not a lot of interesting stuff going on in the Western world. And these people in Mesoamerica did some really cool poetry, really cool writings. And so things like dedications, anniversaries, and cycles, it's really clear they were very important. Their astronomy was fucking awesome. It was really incredible. They wrote a lot of cool stuff down about astronomy. Incidentally, they also tracked things like the planet Mars and Venus and when they'd line up. And recently, earlier this year, scholars found a reference to a planetary alignment that will happen in the year 4500. So they talked about the year 4500 in their calendar, which is a long, long time from now. So the world clearly isn't ending at the one calendar. It's just cycling over and keeps cycling, kind of like the Chinese calendar. After the year of the rat, it becomes the year of the boar. After the year of the dragon, it becomes the next animal, and then it restarts. Our calendars do that too, fortunately. And so, to conclude, they really didn't make all that much interesting prophecy. They talked about a lot of gods and a lot of spirits among them in their lands, and a lot of dedications, rituals. They were very ritualistic. But I think they kind of sucked at this whole prophecy thing anyway. They didn't foretell their own collapse in the year 900. They didn't foretell the Spanish conquest. Man, that really sucked, huh? And so they're still a really, really cool society. And they're glad, and I'm glad for a lot of interest in this archaeology. Archaeology is really cool stuff, digging up human history, learning about who we are, who we were. So enjoy it, elevate your consciousness, and buy a 2013 calendar. Thank you.
So we're going to conclude. We've looked at a number of different phenomena, bridging across many cultures and across many times. And we found some phenomena wanting. Where does that lead us? And in particular, does it allow us to dispense with these claims? Can we throw out these claims? I don't think we can throw them out. Rather, we can throw them out in some respects. We can throw them out pragmatically. We can throw them out in terms of making meaningful decisions in our lives. That's the point of this. This is about what matters, about what you do going forward, okay? But we can't throw it out dogmatically. We can't say that homeopathy will never be a thing that exists. Because if we do that, then we've really betrayed not just ourselves, but we've also betrayed the scientific process. Because we always keep an open mind. We're always open to accepting whatever claim comes along, given the evidence. So if tomorrow someone shows me that despite all our physics and astronomy and geology, that the Earth is actually flat, if they can leap those hurdles, I'm obligated to accept it. I'm not the ultimate authority on some things. That is our talk. I thank you very much for coming.